Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming in on this Saturday morning. My name is Joseph Delap. I'm a professor of games and tactical media at Abertay University in Dundee, Scotland. I'm originally from San Francisco Bay Area, moved to Scotland about 6 years ago to take on a wonderful research position. As part of the activities is what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to introduce our digital art and activism network, and then do a bit about my work, and we'll go through the. We have 4 other people who are going to be sharing some of what they do involved in the network and in their individual practices. So the Digital Art and Activism Network started in 2019. Dr. Laura Luizzi and myself, we received some funding from the Royal Society of Edinburgh to start a network focused on digital art and activism. And honestly, we have started this from a position of really sort of an open consideration of activism, digital art, trying to create some activities and kind of a context to sort of draw in practitioners, scholars, etc., to explore what does it mean to be kind of activist in the digital age. One of our first activities was this, a very sort of major endeavor to create a several-day symposium as part of the Neon Festival in Dundee, Scotland in 2019. And we had 3 days of talks from practitioners all over the world that we had brought in. It was also a uniquely accessible event. We were very conscientious of trying to make an event that was open to people to come in. It was free. We had our first day at the new V&A Museum of Design in Dundee, and then we were in a local kind of hall at a church near University of Dundee, and then at a auditorium in a public library. So it kind of migrated around Dundee in a very interesting way. Connected to that, and if you want to learn more about it, we were invited to create a special issue of Media N Journal, which was the proceedings for the conference. You can find this online through Media N. This had a number of the contributors and presenters and various essays. It's really worth taking a look at, but it really focuses further on social change, art, and technology. And this was, well, I should mention, sorry, I forgot to mention, of course, the symposium was in November of 2019. The grant proposal we had written was for a year of activities, travels, interviews, workshops, and of course the pandemic hit in March of 2020 and everything stopped. And this was one of the few things we could actually do during the pandemic was to put this together. So we did, but everything else we did, the grant period was extended, I think, 3 times for us to be able to actually finally complete our activities in the last year. We also, Laura Luizzi and myself were accepted for a book chapter for this wonderful book that was out this year, Art as Social Practice, edited by Extine Burrow and Judy Walgren. We had a chapter where we had a discussion about digital art and activism. It's a wonderful text. I would recommend it. It's loads of essays, really, really fantastic. But that was, again, something we could work on in the course of the pandemic. Everything we had proposed had been to have these activities in person, and as everyone knows, everything just stopped. We also managed to kind of create 2 online symposia specifically for graduate and PhD level artists and activists. And this was through SAGSA, which is an organization in Scotland, a Scottish Graduate School for Arts and Humanities. And we did an open call and invited and accepted students from all over the world to come and present about what they were doing in their course of study. We had some wonderful keynotes. Shiling Chang, you can actually find this on YouTube. We did this in 2021 and 2022. We've actually got an event coming up end of June, which should be on the 27th of June. Don't have information or links right now because they're still organizing it, but it will be an online workshop with many who are involved in the presentation here today. So if you're interested in that, get in touch. We were finally able to get back together in reality last spring in May. This was the first live event many of us attended after sort of this was kind of the eking our way out of the pandemic. This was at the V&A in Dundee, and we had a workshop with about 20 or so people who had been involved in some of the various activities and others that we had invited in. I'm sure you probably all, maybe everyone forgets, but like that sense of kind of coming out of that isolation and that pain of the pandemic, this was an amazing experience, and people just coming in and sharing and the kind of hope and just being able to interact with each other in a physical space, to be able to talk about, after doing so many Zoom calls and all that nonsense for 2.5 years. This was wonderful, and it really kind of propelled us back into action in a way. One of the consequences of to come out of this was we had invited in Nuno Sacramento, who's the director of Peacock Visual Arts in Aberdeen, Scotland. They do prints, they have a print studio, they have exhibitions and that. He said, hey, this is great. Why don't we do a book documenting all of what went on today? So we have been working with them for the last year to create what is very much a book that's in the flavor of the network, in that we provided a platform. We had no restrictions on what the artists would do, the artists or the academics. We said, you have 3 pages, do what you want. We said it could be recipes, it could be emails, it could be artworks. And so we have this book. It's actually in process. Excuse me, I have the proof right here. We just got this last week, if anybody wants to come see it. But and I'm sorry, I had surgery on my thumb, so I can't really do much with it. But if you want to come take a look at this, we have this, and it should be, we're doing a run of 200 copies. 100 are going to the artists, and about 100 will be available through Peacock Visual Arts. Our emails are at the end of the entire event here today, so if you want to get in touch and interested in that, please let us know. Yeah, I think that is going to go into some of my own work here. So I'm just going to talk briefly about some of what I do. And I kind of find it curious, we were kind of put into this NFT blockchain thread, but that's a kind of curious thing from my perspective. See if we can get this to progress. This is actually the only thing I've ever done about NFTs. If you know John Baldessari's work, you know what this is about. But anyway, I'm not really here to talk about this, but I did this briefly, very quickly, put it on Instagram at the start of the whole NFT kind of thing. But yeah, anyway. But to just give some background of who I am and what I do, my work tends to be a kind of activist approach to contemporary issues, and much of it over the last 20 years have focused on issues of militarism around the globe and as propagated by my government in the United States. Probably the most well-known work is the piece I did about the America's Army Project, which was to intervene in that recruiting game, and instead of playing the game, I was typing in the names of actual US soldiers who had been killed in the then ongoing conflict in Iraq. This was a very controversial action in that space, but it was really quite, I think, important to do, and was a point in my career as an artist, having started doing this stuff back in the 80s as a student, where I really felt kind of complete as an artist, where it was like, embracing the politics and defending this work constantly to attacks and people kind of criticizing what I was doing and why are you protesting in here? You should go to the federal building. And, you know, I'm like, this is the federal building. Like, this is actually government property online. And, you know, anyway, this really was a very pivotal experience on a number of levels. Since that time, I've been doing a number of works around America's utilization of UAVs, drones, overseas, and the kind of horrifying effects on civilian populations. This is actually a participatory project where volunteers are given cutouts. They cut out a drone and they fold it and create a simple little kind of origami style kind of drone. And then they write the name of a civilian casualty from a drone strike in North Waziristan on the wings. These were then strung together. The piece is called 1,000 Drones. It's based on the Japanese tradition of sensaburo, which is the 1,000 cranes, you know, where you put them at a temple and as they deteriorate, the wish is released. And it's become connected, of course, to the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So this was a way of kind of a wry kind of way of taking that and creating a different type of memorial to these victims of my government's actions around the globe. Some other projects in recent years, this was a public artwork, temporary public artwork to create a life-size predator drone using yellow corrugated plastic, which then we wrote the names of drone victims upon the surface of the drone. Quite an intense work that was actually visible on Google Earth at one point, and this was in the flight path of a nearby Air Force base. But this was a really emotional experience and quite involved with the community of bringing in volunteers and activists and students. And I still hear from some of them today, some of the students, that this was one of the most important things they did during their studies at the university. Further on to this was a project I did in 2018 in Karachi, Pakistan, with curator Mahreen Hashmi. And I wasn't able to go to Pakistan, but what I did was I basically bought about 300 jasmine flowers, plants. Jasmine is the national flower of Pakistan. And we, on the rooftop of this gallery, Project 9, I think it was, in Karachi, we built a silhouette and then made out of the plants. And at the end of the exhibition, these plants were gifted to visitors in the local community, which I really like that. It's like this, you know, sense that now these plants are still growing in that context, and every time someone looks at it who picked one out, they will be thinking about this. It was also a bit of a gesture of atonement in a way. Further on, I've also done some projects dealing with gun violence epidemic in the United States. This is the Gun Violence Archive, which is often in the news these days. This came about in a kind of curious way, but I don't really need to go into details, but I do a lot of work in gaming. This was essentially taking the numbers of civilian casualties, civilians killed in the United States by gun violence and adapting Grand Theft Auto to be a data visualization system. So what you see here, the number and the date. So this was a real-time 24/7 live stream on Twitch where GTA would essentially scrape the data from the Gun Violence Archive in real time and update its numbers. And every day at midnight, it would start with the last day's full body count since January of that year and play through an accelerated kind of reenactment of all of those killings to where by the end of the year, it was close to 15,000 that would go through and et cetera. So it was a way to kind of use the game to kind of turn back the tide. Like it's like all the criticism of games is somehow creating violence in the world, and the game in this sense was sort of pointing back at what was actually really happening, being the access to guns and et cetera in the States. But there's documentation of this online on YouTube if you want to see the actual video. We don't have time for that today. And finally, I mentioned like that whole experience of the pandemic. It's really difficult to do anything creative for me during the pandemic, and had quite an intense experience in September of 2021 was when I could finally get back to the States to visit my twin daughters who were on the East Coast in the States. Hadn't seen them, in 2 years. I was so wrapped up in going to see them. I landed in New York City and realized it was the 20th anniversary of the 9/11 attacks. And I literally, like, so much of my work had been focused on those attacks and the results. And I landed and I was like, holy crap. And just prior to that, in August, you might remember the disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan and the drone strike on the Ahmadi family, which was later shown to be a mistake by the Pentagon. This was a very spontaneous act. I went to the 9/11 memorial, and family members are invited to go to this memorial, and they can do rubbings of the names of their family members who are on the memorial. What I did was I walked around the memorial, and I pieced together the first names of each of the victims of the drone strike in Pakistan, in Afghanistan, to create a complete. This was like a very personal kind of gesture of atonement. It's called Remembering the Ahmadis, and it resulted in these very simple rubbings that were quite something to do. So anyway, they are shown like this. More recently, this is a sculpture that was made on site in Suma, Southern Utah Museum of Art in Utah, in the States. And this is a Pepakura 13-foot long AR-15 assault rifle, which is one of the primary weapons of a lot of the mass shootings. And visitors to the gallery were invited to come and write the names of people that have been murdered in these mass shootings. This is about what it looked like towards the end of the exhibition. This was accepted into their permanent collection. It will continue to be interacted with by the public. So yeah, that's me. The email will be up later, but I want to introduce my colleague and a co-conspirator here, Dr. Lara Luizzi. Is that it right? I hope.
Thank you. Thank you, Joseph, because you've been an amazing partner in crime in these years. Today, I would like to talk to you a little bit about what I learned in this network, and actually as that has changed me a little bit as a curator and an art historian. Currently, I'm at Sapienza in Rome, and in the past few years, I have been based in Scotland, where I met amazing artists and curators who have inspired me greatly. What I understood in this network is that a lot of artists are activists, but they don't see themselves as such. So a great deal of this network has been bringing people together, just initiating discussions about how people actually respond to great challenges that we are facing, and how actually we are all fighting different fights, but we are all part of just a global movement that, in a sense, is actually trying to find tools and strategies to tackle the issues that are really just emerging everywhere. I'm talking about climate change. Joe talked about pacifism. I am personally very much involved in, gender equality. I call myself a transfeminist, a feminist. And what I understood is that, I could actually transform and change and implement my curatorial activity, my curatorial practice, to incorporate more and more a feminist practice, an activist practice, and change, the way that I was a researcher and a curator. Now, over the years, I've been involved in a number of projects about video art. I started working on projects about video art in the 70s and 80s. And I really worked on how we could salvage that legacy and bring it to today. But I also understood that something that was missing is that there were some feminist discourses that were very much relevant in the 70s and 80s and are still relevant. They have changed, the strategies might have sort of mutated, but they're still there. And video, in particular, was a powerful tool because it actually was sort of made available at the end of the 60s, early 70s, in a moment in which the feminist movement was developing. So there was sort of a clash of a lot of women who were involved in feminism at various levels, even sometimes not really part of feminist groups, and actually were also utilizing this amazing tool. And I also understood at some point there are some strategies and some approaches that are still relevant in video art today by women artists. So, to get to the point of my talk, it is that I realized that I could enact some strategies as curator to actually make these stories and these strategies alive and more visible and more sort of into the discourse and just sort of highlight these legacies. In 1997, there is this amazing Italian feminist thinker, Adriana Cavarero, who published this book that is called Relating Narratives. According to Cavarero, humans have a narratable self with a unique life story and a desire to be narrated. Thus, we are able to perceive ourselves as narratable selves with a unique story. Even if we don't know that, if we are not agent about it, the selfhood that emerges from someone's stories is exposed and is bound to another who can tell this story. At some point, I understood that, I could be that other. I could be that person who could actually get the story from amazing women artists who actually had informed their work, the personal is political, as they said, and actually were, using their art to tell a story of their own experience as women artists, as women, and as feminists. And what I understood is that through a number of strategies as dialogues, interviews, and even, sort of getting close to this, situations, I could actually tell stories that had not yet been told. And I found a lot of similarities in the strategies that were enacted in video in the 70s and 80s and in today's video art by feminist and women artists. Sometimes I just name the two because a lot of women artists don't define themselves as feminists, but they enact feminist, strategies nonetheless. So I basically focused a lot on personal narratives, and I actually based my curatorial and my writing experience on those narratives. I brought you here some examples of artists that I have been working on lately. I've published some, papers on this artist, and I have exhibited them in my curatorial practice. In particular, I brought you here a series of Italian artists. As you might have read on the newspapers, my country is going through a very difficult time, politically speaking. And, this also means the marginalization of women, LGBTQAI+ community, but those issues were already there. It's not like, that politics have changed and, women became invisible once again. They were already facing a lot of discrimination, marginalization, and deep inequality in the past few years. And these artists were already flagging this. In particular, for example, this is, a work that has, the idea of redirecting the gaze once again. It was an issue in the 70s that was flagged by feminist video artists, and is still something that can be powerfully used to unpack the work of contemporary women video artists. This is a work by Elisabetta Di Sopra, an artist from Venice, that I've been working on a little bit lately. And also the idea of redirecting, transforming, and subverting some very sort of traditional iconographies that here you recognize, the Virgin and with child. And, the idea of tackling issues of representation, identity, that through an autobiographical biographical narration can be unpacked and can be also sort of discussed in depth to flag how media and culture and, society at large are still adopting a patriarchal sort of representation of women. Also, here you have an example of how, ageism can be also tackled and engaged with representation of the body, which can be a vessel of powerful messages still. There was an installation in the Archaeological Museum in Venice that actually sort of powerfully sort of put in communication, our concept of beauty and with, the representation of a woman model. Also here, I brought some work by another artist that I've been, including in my curatorial work and research, Francesca Fini, who actually uses a strategy that actually was very much relevant in the 70s and 80s, the manipulation of the body to actually flag these issues of representation and identity. This is a very interesting work from 2015 on, dieting and, food, our relationship with food in particular. And, The Drawers is a very simple work. It actually sort of shows people drawing the artists from, the artist's perspective. That becomes a model. So again, one of those dichotomies, model artist, that has always been there in art history. So I am not sure if, I've done my research or the artist research justice today in this brief talk, but what I wanted to show you is that, all these issues of representation and identity and one of the greatest genre of art history, portrait, are still there. And as a curator and a researcher, as an activist, as a feminist, I'm really kind of just tackling this. Before I leave the stage to other presenters, I wanted to tell you 2 words about another research that I'm conducting at the moment. I am focusing a lot on women who were teaching media and video in art schools in Europe in the 70s and 80s, as initiators of a new practice and creating new legacies. So if you have been taught by any of these amazing women pioneers, either also in the 90s, please get in touch because I'm really interested to hear your stories. Thank you. Now, the other presenters who couldn't join us today, they sent videos. So hopefully it will start.
Good morning, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be with you today to talk about art activism and digital resistance in the case of Belarus. Time is short, so I'm going to crack straight on. Belarus is a country that's landlocked between Lithuania, Poland, Ukraine, and Russia. Since 1994, it has been ruled by one man, Alexander Lukashenko, often referred to as the last dictator in Europe. During this period, there have been challenges to his reign, but none as serious as the one that came along with the COVID pandemic in the spring of 2020. Indeed, it was the Belarusian authorities' mismanagement of the coronavirus pandemic that inadvertently mobilized civil society in Belarus and was one of the booster rockets for the revolution that happened in the summer of 2020. Initially, the Belarusian authorities denied that coronavirus was a problem and refused to lock down or close down the economy. Cynics said that this was because they couldn't afford to. Instead, civil society organised a people's lockdown whereby people refused to attend for work and to put themselves at danger of exposure to COVID-19. This gradual mobilising of civil society in Belarus in the first part of 2020, whilst the authorities claimed that COVID was a mass psychosis and a foreign plot designed to undermine the government, this mobilisation of civil society proved vitally important. Gil Scott-Heron once said that the revolution will not be televised, and in the case of Belarus, he was absolutely right. The revolution is on Telegram. Telegram, the Russian messaging app designed by the brothers Nikolai and Pavel Durov and founded in 2013, became one of the critical digital tools that activists were to use in the difficult months in late spring and summer of 2020 in Belarus. It was a way of people bypassing the regime's rather analog methods of media control. Something else that should be understood about Alexander Lukashenko is that he is a very analog figure from the last century in terms of how he gets his message across through television and print media. This effectively vacated the online media space to pro-democracy activists in the country. The use of Telegram not only facilitated the exchange of news, but also provided a space for digital creativity and humour at the regime's expense. The paranoia of the regime against these methods of digital organising saw the arrest of one of the country's best-known YouTubers, Sergei Tikhanovsky, in May 2020. He vanished into prison, where he still languishes now. And also, as we'll see in a minute, the political campaigner Viktor Babariko, who decided to stand against Lukashenko in the Belarusian elections of August 2020. The resulting crackdown from the electoral processes, Lukashenko claimed victory in the election on the 9th of August with 80% of the vote, a figure absolutely nobody believes. Initiated a significant crackdown on civil society and voices calling for change. And activists were faced with a choice, either to fall into silence and accept what had happened, to go into exile, as tens of thousands did in the months after the crackdown in August and September 2020, or to join in whatever way the resistance, and the resistance digitally. Here's some images from the summer of 2020. On the left, a meeting of the All Belarusian People's Assembly, the Soviet-style organisation that controls politics and government in the Republic of Belarus, summoned to listen to a speech by Alexander Lukashenko outlining the dark forces that were seeking to undermine the country. On the right, his three main challengers after the jailing of Tikhanovsky and Viktor Babariko. So we have Maria Kolesnikova on the left, currently serving 11 years in prison on trumped-up charges, Veronika Setkulo, currently in exile, and Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, wife of Sergei Tikhanovsky, but much better known as president of the Belarusian state in exile. She is based or her headquarters are in Vilnius. This was taken at a rally of 8,000 people in the northeastern city of Vitebsk in July 2020. What about the interaction of digital tools and activism in the context that I've just outlined? Here's the first case study I want to look at briefly. The art collection of Belgazprom Bank. At one time, Viktor Babariko, who was chairman of the Belgazprom Bank, organised a series of purchases from auctions abroad of famous works of Belarusian art. As Lukashenko's forces began to move against Babariko in June 2020 in order to shut down his candidacy in the presidential election, various branches of the Belarusian police invaded the premises of the Belgazprom Bank collection and confiscated the artworks that had been bought over the previous 10 years, claiming that they were due to be smuggled and there was some tax evasion. If they'd hoped to shut down the gallery, they were disappointed. The very resourceful curator, Alexander Zimenko, and his staff simply put QR codes in the place of the confiscated artworks and kept the gallery open so that people could bring their smartphones and continue to enjoy a collection which had disappeared into government custody. At the same time, one of the key works in the Belgazprom Bank collection was Chaim Sutin's Eva. Chaim Sutin is one of the best-known Belarusian painters of the early 20th century, and in the 1920s, he painted a series of hotel waiters, bellhops, cleaners, as part of an ongoing set of paintings. Babariko bought this work at auction in Sotheby's in New York in 2013 for $1.8 million and repatriated it to Belarus, where it's one of the most valuable artworks now in the country. Of course, this was one of the works seized, and meme makers and bloggers, Twitter users, Instagram folks took the work and used it as the basis for a satirical response to what had happened to the gallery. On the right here, one of the many responses, Eva is shown in a Belarusian prison uniform. Other people took to YouTube to film ephemeral protests. This is an artist, Alexandra Ivanova, who organised a happening in one of the main drags in St. Petersburg in August 2020, during the period of the most savage repression by the Belarusian state of pro-democracy protesters. On the 19th of August, an event was organised where a large ball bearing Lukashenko's image was chased down the prospect by red and white large balls, red and white being the colours of the Belarusian opposition. Finally, right at the end of this talk, I want to consider digital strategies since the savage crackdown and since street protest in Belarus became almost impossible on pain of a long prison sentence and physical harm at the hands of police or prison guards. One of the key organizations in the resistance to the Lukashenko regime, both on and offline, is the Belarusian Cyber Partisans, a loose and amorphous group of IT specialists who have used Telegram and used ethical hacking skills to undermine the state wherever possible. So amongst other things, the Cyber Partisans have released all the details of everyone in Belarusian law enforcement and the Belarusian KGB online. They have released sensitive Belarusian government documents online, and anecdotally, there has been an instruction from Lukashenko to his senior ministers that anything really sensitive should be put on paper and kept in a locked desk drawer, much like the 1970s, to avoid this online exposure. And you can see a couple of the images that they've used. The Cyber Partisans were also involved in delaying Russian military traffic after the invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, and their use of Belarus as a staging post for military training and military transport. So their hacking of the Belarusian railway network has helped to significantly delay Russian military traffic in the months following the invasion. Another interesting case was the use of AI to dox officers associated with the repressive forces of the Lukashenko regime. This is an officer associated with the Oman riot control police, and an action called "You Have No Mask" was launched by an individual called Andrei Maximov, who is a Belarusian AI developer based in the United States. And he used the images of masked officers and a database to identify officers through their social media accounts, making a statement that the era of anonymity for people involved in violent repression was over and that they would be found. This project was not flawless and misidentified a couple of people, and was also questioned quite seriously in terms of its algorithm by the cyber partisan group, but it was nonetheless an interesting action which caused significant consternation and requests to leave amongst the repressive security apparatus in Belarus. Just finally, those of you who've been following the news this week may have heard that Alexander Lukashenko was ill. He vanished last week for a period of 6 days in total. The reaction of the authorities in these situations is to say nothing, much in the manner of the old Soviet Union when one of the general secretaries of the CPSU became incapacitated through health. Lukashenko was wheeled out yesterday, on Monday the 15th of May, looking still extremely unwell. They think he has some sort of myocardial infection. And immediately, again, social media users took him to task. The image on the left was actually removed from his official Telegram channel and website because it was so widely mocked, amongst the responses being that Madame Tussauds' new waxwork wasn't very interesting, and it was great to see that Belarusian taxidermy was in such great shape. In the centre, the official picture of him in his uniform outside the Air Defence headquarters of Belarus. Someone photoshopped a cardboard cutout of a well-known FC Minsk footballer next to him and said, "Which one is fake here?" And finally, on the right, someone suggesting that Lukashenko had been away for 6 days because he'd been moonlighting at Eurovision in Liverpool that weekend, or indeed suggesting that the inflatable in the Borisov football stadium had gone missing and had been dressed up as Lukashenko for the purpose of this photograph. I've come to the end of my talk and raised some case studies, which I hope you found interesting. Just finally, if you'd like to follow this up, or if you have any questions that you'd like to ask in our roundtable, or online, feel free to follow these great sources up or be in touch with myself. I'll leave you now. Thank you very much indeed for watching.
Hello, everyone. Today, I will speak about Silencer, a series of performances in a sensory deprivation suit. These pieces were performed in cities across the UK, including London, Leicester, Corby, and Aberdeen. Silencer is a wearable piece, a suit covered with soundproof panels. The hood of the suit hides binaural microphones, which record the sound around me, including the comments from passers-by. During the performance, I don't hear much as I wear earplugs and sound-deadening headphones. This amplifies the feeling of alienation, allowing me to experience the environment through almost complete silence. Silencer was originally developed in January 2018 as a response to an open call that asked for site-specific sound artworks in the area of Elephant Castle in London. This is a very busy area of the city, so I decided to create an activist piece that will allow the following. Experience of public spaces in almost complete silence due to earplugs and sound deafening headphones. Negotiation of public spaces in a suit that conceals my gender and is often found unsettling, humorous, strange, and similar. Audio recording of the sonic environment around me and my negotiation of public spaces and their audiences in silence. At conceptual level, absorption of urban noise by acoustic panels wrapped around my body, a form of sonic activism. While the artwork is multifaceted, at its core, it tackles the politics of contemporary art in public spaces. When encountering Silencer, people are surprised. They compare it with references from a wider culture, such as SpongeBob, condoms, COVID, snowmen, and similar. As the majority of Silencer's audience is not aware of its rationale or art statements, people of different educational and class backgrounds tend to react differently to it. This is further amplified by the way Silencer gestures to the public. It doesn't verbally introduce itself, so audience has to make their own sense of the piece. By reflecting on those reactions, it is clear that Silencer makes demarcations and territorializations of public spaces by different social groups visible. Some of it can be heard in this sound clip.
Tim, let me take a picture. Wait, get me in. You're really prepared for COVID, aren't you? Is it styrofoam? Why did you go in? You're getting annoyed, aren't you? Well, you should have chose that job before coming. You look so pretty. Corona. What are you supposed to do? He's dead.
Oh my word. Hello.
He actually supposed to be? What is that? You can't hear.
Could I?
I want a selfie.
Wait, do they make money off it, or do they just dress up like that?
I'm gonna give her a quiz.
Thank you very much, sir. Sirs, do join me. Come on, -1, -2.
There we are.
I only do one good deed a month, so make the most of it.
She can't hear a word you're saying.
Better that way.
This was a segment of an audio recording of the latest iteration of Silencer in Corby last year. A complete mix is available now in the form of a podcast released by Firmenwoods, a contemporary arts organization in England. The podcast consists of the recorded documentation of Silencer, a discussion about the piece, and the accompanying text. To learn more about the piece, or if you have any questions, you can contact me via social media or email maja.zeco@gmail.com. Silencer is informed by a vast body of sound art and soundscape literature. Some of it is listed here. Hello, everyone.
Hi, I'm sorry that I can't be with you in person. Various circumstances have conspired against me, and I'm now only able to deliver my short presentation by video. However, if everything is going well, I'm also on the phone or on Zoom right now and will be able to join at least in the discussion. I'll keep my presentation quite brief. It's intended as a sketch of some critical ideas, but also as a provocation to open up potentially interesting points for discussion. And my point of departure here is the question of whether blockchain technology is a viable medium or infrastructural context for activism. And if so, how the technology can become useful or is already becoming useful for artistic experimentation conducted in an activist mode. Among blockchain evangelists, you really don't have to look very hard to find voices that will claim that this technology has always, from the very beginning, been defined by fundamental activist aspirations. The Bitcoin white paper from 2008, in which Satoshi Nakamoto outlined the computational backbone for an alternative, trustless system of digital cash, is generally understood to have served the purpose of disrupting the conventional economics of institutionalized finance by creating this alternative system, that cannot be controlled by central banks or government regulators or any other potentially untrustworthy intermediaries. And so some claim that in this sense, it might be said that there is a fundamental activist dimension to blockchain technology. I don't agree with this perspective. For example, I refuse to recognize the kind of deregulation championed by neoliberal capitalism as a form of financial activism. Along the same lines, I don't count the predatory nature of ultra-libertarian anarcho-capitalism as in any way a desirable element of activist practice. In the vast majority of its current manifestations, therefore, I think blockchain technology is fundamentally and incontrovertibly characterized by protocols and functionalities that rely on tokenization, on transactional exchanges, and on the negotiation of consent among blockchain users on the basis of calculating how much power those actants have in relation to one another. I describe this fundamental characteristic as the fintech or financial technology legacy of blockchain technology. And much of my research in recent years has been dealing with the struggle of coming to terms with this legacy and with the question of how it might be overcome. On the next few slides, rather than retracing this critical perspective, I want to present a few examples that are quite relevant, potentially productive for the purposes of moving towards a critique of financial activism on and off the blockchain. The examples illustrate two possible avenues for how the fintech legacy of blockchain technology might be instrumentalized productively. There are quite a number of different ways of approaching this topic, but for the sake of time, I'm here just highlighting two interesting approaches. Both represent attempts to appropriate and instrumentalize the logic of tokenization and financialization, in other words, the underlying logic of finance that characterizes blockchain technologies, for activist purposes that develop critical perspectives on the harmful effects of the ideologies of capitalism as such. The first set of examples does so in the context of decolonial practices. The second set seeks to convert the financialization protocols of blockchain tech into cooperative anti-capitalist community efforts. Here's my first example, a project called Forconomy by Tzu-Tung Lee and Winnie Soon, which instrumentalizes blockchain tech to critique colonial practices of land appropriation and to explore the ways in which the logic of financial capitalism has enabled a perpetuation of exploitative colonial practices in digital contexts. Specifically, the project deals with questions of land access and control over contested areas in the South China Sea. By using blockchain technology and by invoking its vague and oftentimes fantastical promises of digital scarcity and ownership in digital artifacts, the artists fundamentally questioned the assumption that ownership in land, or also by extension ocean waters, could ever be fairly, equitably, and meaningfully determined and allocated. They use blockchain-enabled smart contract functionality and blockchain protocols to allow you to buy small amounts of territory in the South China Sea. And the project will then produce a blockchain registered record of the transaction and will give you an immutable record of your ownership claim, which of course mostly amounts to a very strong reminder of the impossibility of enforcing such a claim, and really also the absurdity of even wanting to make such a claim. My next example is Ballot NFT, also an experiment in decolonial activism that uses blockchain technology. The project concerns a so-called ballot sculpture, a wooden sculpture that was carved during an uprising on a Unilever plantation in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, but that is now held in the Virginia Museum of Fine Art in Richmond in the US. Calls to have the sculpture repatriated have been denied by the museum. So a group calling itself the Congolese Plantation Workers Art League is trying to reclaim the sculpture digitally, since it's not possible to take possession of it materially. The group has been producing digital artifacts, NFTs, based on digital images of the sculpture. These reappropriations of colonial theft are being sold or auctioned, both to draw attention to the issue, but also to produce real change for the communities affected. The idea is to use the proceeds to buy land to give back to these communities. Additionally, the group has also used the proceeds to build a white cube type gallery on the former plantation with the offer to house the sculpture there. So here the tokenization and the financial logic of blockchain technology serves to both expose and experimentally reverse practices and effects of property-oriented colonial exploitation. My second set of examples has to do with DAOs. A DAO, very briefly, that stands for Decentralized Autonomous Organization, is a blockchain-enabled organization that takes advantage of many of the affordances of this technology for purposes of oftentimes cooperative community building. So you can think of DAOs as non-hierarchical, cooperative, distributed organizations built with blockchain tech. And what's key here is the ideals and principles on which the communities are built are actually computationally encoded in the infrastructure, in the technological infrastructure. What this means is that a DAO, might have a set of principles to organize a kind of manifesto, but this manifesto can also become the computational infrastructure of this organization. So I like to describe DAOs in this sense as operationalized, self-actualizing manifestos. They have also been described, however, as what's called a group, something like a group chat with a wallet. Okay, so they still oftentimes operate very much based on financial logic of transactional behaviors and decision making that is very true to the blockchain fintech legacy. KlimaDAO is an example. It's a DAO with an environmentalist goal. I was quite excited about this when I first came across it. The idea is, as I understood, that all members will pool their funds to use them to buy credits on the carbon futures market. And then, like a radical quasi-financial carbon sink, to capture these credits, never to release them again, with the idea to essentially make carbon credits a scarce commodity and making it unaffordable to trade in them. Thereby forcing corporations to really actually change behaviors. If you want to look this up a bit more closely, you'll realize that that's not actually quite how it works. They instead incentivize participation with a promise that you will earn rewards with a new custom-built digital currency that is backed by carbon assets. So while, yes, there is an environmentalist goal at play here, ultimately this project stays very much true to the logic of financial capitalism. So to me, this DAO does not operate in a credible activist mode at all. Here is very briefly another example of a DAO-like project that is more relevant. TerraO, or TerraZero, is a big project that has taken various forms over the years since about 2016. It uses blockchain protocols to constitute a piece of land in Germany, a forest, as a legally self-owning entity. Here the DAO involves both human and non-human computational agents in a self-governing, self-reproducing, highly complex hybrid assemblage. The underlying idea is that this assemblage can monitor and control its own health and growth through a range of sensors, algorithmic protocols, and legal mechanisms. Over time, the forest could then decide, for example, to trade some of the raw materials it produces in exchange for new territory or for environmental sustainability initiatives. Importantly, the underlying fintech elements are here appropriated to empower a non-human actor, and the transactional logic of the protocols on which the project is built can begin to function detached from human actors and with an aim and orientation that might exist on the basis of fintech technologies, but which also exists outside of the logic of the profit-oriented logic on which they conventionally operate. To wrap things up, let me return to the question with which I opened my very brief presentation, namely whether the affordances of blockchain technology can serve to frame and support activist modes of practice. If so, then we still have to explore if it's possible for such modes to push beyond what I've described as a fintech legacy of the underlying technology and all of the connotations of capitalist accumulation or colonialist extraction that this implies. I gave some examples that could add up to be seen to suggest that this might be possible. And now I want to end with a note on the tactics that this might point towards. In my mind, the majority of current uses of blockchain technology manifest strategically. And I use this notion of strategy here in the sense in which it is used by Michel Desserteaux as a mode of practice that tends to be goal-oriented, that submits to institutional order, most often in a profit-seeking mode of practice that represents a calculation and purposeful manipulation of power relationships. Business strategies, military strategies, political strategies are all good examples of this. Tactics, by contrast, tend to be open-ended, improvisational, highly dynamic and responsive. They tend to designate appropriation-based ways of making do, of resisting the ordering control of strategy. And it is in this mode, really, that I believe activist uses of blockchain technology, whether within or beyond artistic experimentation, can become possible. Artistic experimentation with activist aspirations that want to meaningfully engage blockchain technology can do so, I think, if it deploys the affordances of this technology tactically, if it manages to recalibrate the logic of financialization and tokenization in such a way that it points beyond the fintech legacy of blockchain technology. Thanks.
I think we have 5 minutes for some questions. See if we can get to the, oops, that's actually not what we want to be seeing. Any questions? And if you have questions for our speakers who were recorded, not very, it's kind of awkward, but please do send them an email. I know they would very much welcome the input and questions.
Et s'il n'y a pas de questions maintenant, il peut y avoir des questions dans les allées du Forum des images, bien sûr.
Right, so there may be questions in the room, but you can always reach out to our speakers if you bump into them in the corridors of the Forum des Images.
Hello. For the activism grouping process, right, for the network you build up, which is a very interesting element, and I'm very interested to see more of that. How did you have the decision process, which kind of media, which kind of practice you would include into this, or were you practically open to everything which would relate to activism?
I would say very open.
Very open. The idea was incorporating as many different approaches and technologies and issues that, because as we mentioned before, we feel that a lot of strategies and a lot of, problem solving is actually really translatable. And so it's just transferable knowledge that we are promoting. So we invited a lot of people to join. Some people couldn't because of time. Some people sent their material. And we hope that in the future we will continue to expand. So if you feel that your work could actually sort of be part of this, we would be very open to just so please email us or just approach us here, because we feel that actually we have flagged a lot of these similarities in practices and approaches.
Yeah,
Thank you for the question. It was a very great question.
Yeah, I would say that's really crucial to how we've been thinking about this, is not having a kind of orthodoxy or sort of like you have to fit these kind of categories. And in some ways, I was just speaking personally. It comes from my own path towards this, because when I did that Dead in Iraq project, I was tentatively kind of embracing that notion of being an artist and doing this sort of activist gesture, which I was even uncomfortable calling art at first, And one thing that was quite interesting with this, like I had mentioned, we had invited Nuno Sacramento to come to this workshop, and in the intro to the book, again, he says, he didn't think of himself at all as an activist. And he was like, why are they inviting me? And then he came, and it's like, he's part of it. He's helping produce this text. He's, you know, and because we saw in his curation and what he was doing that he would touch upon these themes in his work. So I think in some ways it's almost like an invitation, you know, to kind of take that. In activist circles, they talk about stepping off the curb, and that was one of the things we talked about at the workshop quite a bit. It's literally that moment when you stepped off the curb and joined the march. You know, it's like, when do you actually take that leap? And I think that's a very important thing for everybody to be thinking about, particularly with the crisis going on in the world today.